I know we're rewinding several months, but this is the first time I've had you guys on, and people again are going to roll their eyes at the thought of let's go through Lincoln Riley again. And I get that they're done with Lincoln Riley. I would be too, but I want to get your perspective on this because obviously you're talking about a top 5 program in the country. You're talking about a guy that was highly thought of. You're talking about a team that was dominating the conference. And then all this comes out after he leaves. That obviously wasn't taken well. Both that, it's unprecedented that we have a coach who's leading an elite program leave for another would-be or used to be elite program. And we had it happen twice in the span of a couple of days with Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley. And then it was the manner in which he left. I just want to get you guys' take on, wow, this is going to be a wide open question. Lincoln Riley's tenure at OU, was he as good as people thought he was? Now that you can kind of look back on it, just how he left the program, just his tenure, and how you feel about, obviously you guys were, I'm sure, listening to a ton of fans that were in panic mode for a few days, if not a few weeks, about what's going to happen. And now that it's transitioned to Brent Venables, just your review of Lincoln Riley, what he's all about, and his tenure at OU.
So with Lincoln Riley, I think his offense, with Toby Rowland, and obviously on this show and with our fan base, we're not huge Lincoln Riley people anymore, I guess is a nice way to say this here. But his offense is, you can't deny what they produced. It is going to be a slight drop-off, I think, at least going into year one with Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel. There's going to be some growing pains. I know they've had time together at Central Florida, and he understands the system. But I think going from that Lincoln Riley offensive system to Jeff Lebby, there is going to be a little bit of a drop-off, at least right away. But I don't think it's something that's going to be long-term. I think we'll pick it up. I think as far as how Lincoln Riley left, that was a hot topic of discussion on our show for a long time. And as Jose was talking about earlier, we asked Toby Rowland the same question because he's a guy who is close with, or who was close with Coach Riley. Got to interview him, at least once a week with the coach's show, going to practice, things like that. And so we all believe that Lincoln Riley knew before that Bedlam game that he was leaving. Just the way that he convinced the whole coaching staff that he took with him to go 24 hours after the game, things like that. And, he always talks about how it was just a spur of the moment type deal, whatever. No, that's none of us believe that as far as.
Has anyone here made a life-changing major decision about your family, where you're going to work, traveling across the country, all of that in like 3 hours after you just coached biggest game of the season? I just don't think that happens.
So we asked Toby Rowland that, the voice of the Sooners, and he was actually telling us that him and his crew that calls the game with him, they were talking about it on the way up to Stillwater, and they actually believed that there was a possibility that he would take the LSU job. Just there was a lot of smoke around it at the time. It was something we were all concerned about, I think, as OU fans, and he immediately shuts that down in the post game presser from the OSU game. Says, "I'm not going to LSU." Whatever. 2 hours later, it feels like we're seeing all the tweets that he's going to USC. So I think the way he did it could not have been done in a worse way. And then not only that, then he gets on TV like a week later and he's talking about how, and boys, you know how passionate I get about this on our show, when he's talking about how he doesn't take players from Oklahoma, he takes them from the transfer portal, or when he says that the NCAA needs some guardrails because it's getting ridiculous. And Lincoln Riley, you are the reason that the NCAA would need guardrails. Like, you did this.
Yeah.
If I could just cut in before you other two go, the one that really set me off was once I heard that he only met with the team for like 5 minutes. Okay, these players have invested their lives in making a decision because of where you're going to be. And I know it's difficult for these coaches leading up to this decision when they face the media and they got to say the right things and they got to walk a tightrope if they're considering other jobs. And I understand that's difficult for them. But when you can't face your team, I think at that point, you give them all the time that you can possibly give them to vent, to whatever you need to do. They have practiced and toiled and lifted weights and done all the things that they've done day after day after day for years, some of them for 4 or 5 years, and you're going to step in for 5 minutes and then see ya. That's not right.
Yeah, yeah, that whole deal. Whenever I was reading about how fast and how quick his, leaving was and all that stuff was ridiculous. But kind of looking at his tenure as a whole, I will say, I mean, I'm not going to, obviously I'm a little biased, but you have to look at it as a whole. He came in and took over for Bob Stoops, and I felt like when Bob Stoops was coaching towards the last few years, it felt a little stale, and it felt like OU needed a new face and a little bit of a revitalization. I mean, OU was playing well; they were winning a lot of games, but they weren't competing at the highest of high levels. I mean, obviously you think about the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, that was one of the, great bowl games and everything, but it felt like OU needed to take that next step. And when Bob Stoops retired and Lincoln Riley took over, I was extremely excited. And you look at his tenure, I mean, how many, trips to the college football playoffs, Heisman winners. I mean, the team was playing at an extremely high level. The offense was figured out. I mean, he was terrific. I mean, his name now, Lincoln Riley's name, it pulls obviously the highest profile quarterbacks. I mean, most quarterbacks want to play for him, and I don't blame him. I mean, he's got a proven track record, back-to-back number 1 overall picks, Heisman winners. Why wouldn't you want to go play on his offense? He just couldn't figure out the defense. Granted, he kind of inherited, Mike Stoops, and he made the decision to get rid of him after the Texas game. And I don't blame him for that, because it felt like everyone, including us and, everyone in the stands, wanted Mike Stoops gone. But the Grinch coming in, and the defense was playing better. It just wasn't at the next level. And I just felt like the whole fan base, or the boosters, and he wasn't getting what he wanted as far as the financial support and everything, and more of a coaching staff and more recruiting and all that stuff. And I think he felt like he would get that at USC, and I think that's what they promised him. And I think there was a sense of the OU boosters and the money that they didn't totally believe in him, and they weren't going to open up the checking accounts for him, and like they've done for Brent Venables. I mean, the amount of money and the renovations that they're starting to do with Venables and the buy-in with the boosters and everything else is totally different than with Lincoln Riley. There's probably some behind-the-scene things happening that none of us know about, but he was a terrific coach. The way he left, he could have done it better, and he has even said he would like to, if he could go back, he would do it differently. I mean, his tenure, it was a great time, it was a great ride, but I feel like Bob Stoops took the program a little, higher. Riley took it even higher, and I think Venables can take that next and final step, because at the end of the day, defense wins championships. Most of the teams that win the national championship are with great defenses. That's just what happens and what most teams in every sport does.
All right. So out of the three of us, I feel like I'm the least I'm critical, but definitely the least critical of the move. Definitely not to say that I wasn't passionately against Lincoln Riley for a few weeks there after he left, because I was. But looking back, like Brum said, he won a lot at Oklahoma. Like that's something you can't deny. He went to the playoffs multiple times, Big 12 champion, most of his years there. He was successful. The one thing that you can always poke at is he was never able to hire a defensive staff that was able to get him to the next level. And I think that's something that some SC fans that are really high on this, and I understand them, like that SC is going from a program that has historically they're really good, but has been underperforming recently. So they're getting an upgrade at coaching, but their defense is still suspect. Maybe they'll improve over the next 3 years, but I think that's something that I think as college football fans we should all look at, because if that can improve, I think Lincoln Riley has the potential to head a team to get into a national championship. I don't know if that's anytime soon, but I also wouldn't say that it's impossible. With how he left Oklahoma, it's obviously not a good look, like you said, Mark. Like, why would you only talk to your team for 5 minutes if you felt like this was an all right decision? These guys, like you mentioned, made the decision to come to Oklahoma to, at the end of the day, play for you. and he's kind of leaving them in the dust. That's obviously not a great look, but as long as he makes the right decisions wherever he's coaching, he can field a great offense. It's the other side of the ball that he's very hands off. I think that's why I like Venables right now. It seems like he is more hands off and just looking at it as a CEO. If we're going to look at it like a company, right? He's making sure that all aspects are working as a unit. Lincoln Riley is very hands-on the offense, and it seems like very hands-off the defense, and is letting Grinch head that program. And the players that have left Oklahoma recently, for example, Perion Winfrey is probably the biggest advocate of this. Not a huge fan of that defensive staff that is now at USC.
So just to wrap up the narrative, you guys know how storylines, narratives get blown out of proportion, that if a player or coach gets tagged or a program with something, everybody believes that's all it is. And of course, Lincoln Riley inherited that Oklahoma gets blown out in the playoffs from Bob Stoops. So he has to kind of take that on. Plus, he played in 3 playoff games. I don't think he gets near enough credit for the effort against Georgia in the Rose Bowl. It was a toss-up. They could have been in the national championship game. The Alabama game, you can credit them. Did they actually come back in the second half, or did Alabama put it on cruise control? You can spin that either way. I'm going to go that Alabama was a pretty damn good football team, and who's going to play with them. And the LSU game was, they got destroyed. Okay. But again, the narrative gets just overridden that they get blown out all the time on the national stage. So I think he was a bit unfairly judged for those 3 games to a certain extent.